Through the Noise with your host, Ernesto Glucksmann.
And we're live. So, David, thanks again. David Beurle, you're the founder and CEO of Future IQ. Thanks for swinging by again. I have to do the introduction on what happened. I love talking to people like you that have to deal with getting professionals to think about the future of their organization, the future of their city. It's very difficult to even just sort of singularly anticipate what might be an outcome, good or bad, that you have to account for, and then to do it in a group setting. I just think that's an incredible role and skill set that you'd have to accumulate to make that happen. And as you and I were talking, what happened? The internet crashed on the East Coast of the United States, killed our episode. We had such a great flow. So here we are again for take two. And I appreciate you coming on from across the pond. I know it's like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening right now for you.
No, it's 3 p.m. So it's pretty good, right? We're only 5 hours different. So that's cool.
Yeah. The exciting part was you had gone to you had just got back actually from an event at one of the Windsor Castle. There's more than one, or it's just one?
So it was, first of all, it was a virtual event, right? So
okay.
And it was a follow-up actually. A couple of years ago we held a global consultation at Windsor Castle in the UK, and so Windsor Castle is the Queen of England's primary residence, so it's quite near Heathrow Airport, but it's sort of her main country estate, and she has others obviously, but it's her preferred home. And anyway, it's part of that complex, right? So it's a whole organisation, but there's a particular corner which is called St George's Cathedral, that sort of operation there, and they host discussions about important emerging social issues. And we partnered with them a couple of years ago to talk about the future of urban living. So we were really interested in this idea of there's all this technology that's reshaping cities, right? But we're really interested about, well, what might it be like for human beings to live in cities, in 2040 and 2050, right? Because we're in this massive transition of people moving from being spread across the landscape, like mostly agrarians, which is, if you go back 50 years ago, a lot of people were in agrarian settings, whereas now, in developed countries, 90% plus of people live in cities of more than 100,000 people. And so that trend's accelerating. So we were really interested about what does this mean for the evolution of people and for what it's like to live in cities as you couple together social change, technology, and all those things. And what was really great was we did it in this hall in Windsor Castle, but it's where Shakespeare used to present his plays to the monarch of the time, right? So you had this kind of weird juxtaposition of this 600-year-old history and talking about the future of urban living. So it was
not just
cool,
the future, like next year. You're talking about 20 years into the future, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
That must be quite kind of inspiring, or what does that atmosphere lend to the event?
First of all, it's like a very unusual setting, right? And it's like that particular event. It's a way to really, for people to disconnect from their daily life, because it's quite physical, right? You literally walk through King Henry VIII gates into a compound environment, because the castle is a walled castle, and you have the Beefeater guards and all that. So you're sort of transported to an alternate reality, right? And what we find is that why that location and the partnership with St George's House is so great is that it's a chance literally for people to disconnect from busy life and put some thinking power to a really important topic that there's a lot of unknown, and really to sort of immerse and speculate about the future and how things might evolve. So that's the beauty of the setting, of course. I mean, the topic was fantastic, but the setting was brilliant.
And then, how many people we're talking about here?
So originally we had about just shy of 30 people.
Okay.
But we reconvened at the end of January, which was what we were talking about last time before the internet broke down. But we reconvened people virtually and added some extra people. So we had nearly 40 people from 17 different countries. And what we were specifically talking about only a couple of weeks ago now is what do we think is the impact of the pandemic on the future of urban living? So we've done this work, a couple of years ago, and now we have this massive, like, global pandemic laid over the top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's been going on for so long, there's this sort of debate about how elastic or inelastic will be some of the changes that get driven by the pandemic. What trends get accelerated? So, for example, you could think about online shopping, and home delivery. That's clearly something that's been accelerated by the pandemic.
100%, right? It's like finally we have the need for it in a sense.
Totally, right. And automation and robotics, to where there's been sort of problems with humans in the production system and so on, or the lack of reliability of humans if you have illness and so on. But there are other issues like sort of public spaces and how the use of those has changed. Even quite small cities are talking about up to 300 or 400% increase of public spaces as people are sort of working from home or in some sort of a lockdown. And so public spaces have become much more important. So we were trying to really understand what we thought were the big shifts that would occur as a result of the pandemic on the future of urban living, right? So it was great to have the original group reconvene and to re-look at our work from 2 years ago, but then do with the lens of a global pandemic over the top of that to see.
And you couldn't all get together at the castle. You had to do it virtually.
We had to do it virtually, right?
It's like,
but it was still a very cool conversation, right?
Right. And so, and just to get a sense of some of these people, I mean, these are like what, city planners or officials, or like what kind of folks were there from these
really interesting cross section? Actually, we had people who are from sort of like the Minister of Transportation in a European country, head of technology in a major auto industry company. We had people who were architects and designers, academics, people who are involved in vertical agriculture or urban agriculture, human health, like a whole range of sort of skill sets. People who are but working essentially have some functioning knowledge of sort of macro trends around urban environments. But as I said, we had people from 17 countries. So we had people from South American continent, North America, obviously Europe and Asia and so on. But having all those different, just 17 countries to start with, plus all those different skills, is really a fascinating cross section of expertise.
And that kind of gives you like you're sort of like clipping out a window of perspectives from humanity in terms of what they're seeing across the world. And then you try to, what's the process then like with you, sort of, I guess, the ringleader of bringing these people together to make some coherent analysis around what they're thinking will be the impact, right? The long-term impact or short-term impacts. Did you look at both long-term, short-term?
Yes, we did. We looked at sort of what are the immediate terms of it. Then what do we think will stay or last, or what might retract back to the way things were, right? So, what are sort of permanent shifts or accelerated shifts, and what do we think are just kind of adjustments in the short term? But in terms of the process, actually, it's really interesting you asked about that, because one of the things that I have found is that really in the last decade, people have become more aware of thinking about the future. We've been, as a company, as Future IQ, we've been sort of really trying to work with people on future planning for sort of 2 decades, right? And up until about a decade ago, it was kind of hard work. People were just people were not super interested, right? And I think there was a period, right, in the 60s when people were, right, when the World Future Society, but that was also when humanity was going to the moon, and there was all sorts of kind of like almost
cultural
science fiction
changes that were aggressive and right.
And what I think is really fascinating? I think the decade of the 2020s, in hindsight, when we get to 2030, will be a very similar period in humanity where there's this decade ahead of us, I think, has a lot of change, and it's got the same sort of major macro trends converging. So you have this whole big drive of new technologies, right? So if you think about artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, I mean, we're already making great leaps, obviously, but there's going to be an acceleration of that in the next decade. But you have got this convergence with some generational shifts that I think is going to create this same kind of environment for lot of change, social norms being disrupted and so on. And I think the pandemic just lays over the top of that and sort of accelerates some of that. But my point actually was that it really in the last couple of years, and I really have seen since the pandemic, is that people are much more interested about the future. You know, you can look at almost any topic at the moment, and people are really having quite deep and thoughtful conversations as industries about the future of, right? Be it the future of tourism or the future of transportation or the future of work. You know, you can't look at any news feed without seeing one of those type of topics be a point of discussion. And I just think as humanity, we've suddenly clocked on to, wow, the future is pretty uncertain, and there's a lot of really profound change occurring, and we don't know how that's going to necessarily shake out or where it's going to settle down. But I think the pandemic really brought a lot of those big trends to a very personal level for people, because we've all been very personally impacted. Every human being on the planet has been impacted by a single event, right? And it's sort of illuminated all these other things that are going on. So we sort of kind of explored that a little bit. But that's my observation, is that I think people have become very interested. So in terms of our work of helping people assemble their thoughts, people seem to have a greater appetite. You know, people are more intellectually curious about trying to understand trends and what it means than they were 1 year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Interesting. Yeah, because I guess you could think of like there are technological advances. Maybe, you know, your computer gets better or whatever software that you use for your work improves, but the day to day doesn't really hit you with like, what does this really mean as you try to extrapolate? Most people don't really have all that much time to think about the implications, right? And then suddenly something like this, a pandemic that locks everybody down, that threw everything for a loop, that gave you a ton of new things to then think about, or I guess worry about, probably has stimulated a lot of people to thinking, wow, we're a lot more vulnerable than we thought we were as an organization or as my job or personally, whatever. And then I guess B, I'm not even prepared to understand how to think through what really is what are the impacts that are, you know, what are the implications that really matter to me the most, or that's going to be important to keep an eye on, right? So
That's right. And because we collectively, people have been forced to confront what might have been unimaginable before.
right, or
And
like, oh, that's just like that happens, maybe, you know, pandemics, disease, that's some weird
yeah,
country
but
that's
then
not
all the
set
knock-on
up
effects
right,
are,
or what, you know, you can easily just write that off in your mind until suddenly, nope, it's everywhere, it's here.
yeah.
Right.
But you know what I think is really heartening out of it is that, like for humanity, is the degree to which we have been incredibly resilient and being able to pivot, right? I mean, if you just think about the numbers of industries that have basically gone essentially from relying on, you know, traditional ways to interact to virtually online, right? And all of our food supply chains and all the potential threats that came to those, and you know, the concept of basically the global aviation industry shutting down and so on, and yet things have really just kept going in a really remarkably consistent manner. I mean, sure, we had shortages here, or there's disruptions there, and so on, but at the level of a functioning of society and a functioning of a global kind of supply chain, all of that managed to work itself out in really quick order.
Very fast. Very
Yeah,
fast. Like I remember April was probably the scariest month for most people in the US. I don't know what it was like where you are, but it was like, I think April was the shock that everybody has to go into some kind of lockdown. And what does that mean? And then toilet paper running out in America.
yes.
Thanks, everybody. But yeah, that sort of shook people's feelings of like, what the hell? Like, I think people, I mean, there's a lot of stress around that, a lot of low level and high level stress I can imagine. But
Yeah.
here we are a year into it, and a lot of it's become just kind of my now routine of just dealing with whatever it is, which is amazing. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you had asked me in April what are the catastrophic, what catastrophes are likely to happen beyond that, I couldn't give you a coherent answer, but it just seemed like doom and gloom everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But now it seems like, okay, yes, there are people struggling. Yes, there are a lot of sick people. All of that, not to take away from any of that. There's a lot of mismanagement and tragedy that has happened over here. I don't know if you've paid attention, David,
Yes, I
but
have.
we have not really done this very well. Any case, maybe we're a good example of what not to do at this point. But in any case, overall, we still managed to feed 350 million people, still got electricity going, still somehow figured out ways to deal with this new reality. And we're
Yeah.
like now in a more, I don't know, it just feels personally we're on a more routine arrangement. It's not great, it's not fun, it's not, there's issues all around, but it's still, you know, it it's amazing in that sense. Like humanity has been able to figure out a way through this, right?
That's right. And so I think at the level of, if you think it in terms of resilience, right? So
Mhm.
it's really highlighted, I think, the ability for humanity to adapt and to be resilient. But in our discussions at Windsor Castle, or our virtual discussions, a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago, there were some issues that we did see that I think would be worth kind of probing, because the pandemic does put our cities or our urban living on a slightly different trajectory to what we're on, right? And I think there are some important things that we explored that would be really great to sort of talk a bit about.
Let's do it.
Some of the high level things are just a couple of things and these were sort of themes that came across the various breakout groups we had. So we talked about social fabric and structure, distribution of power and influence, the city lifestyles, the built environment, smart cities and technology, all that kind of stuff, resource management, recycling, and so on. But the issues that people talked about that the pandemic has really impacted that we have to, I think, take note of for over time. And one is about trust. And that was an issue that every group explored, right? Which was the impact on trust, and at simple levels like trust of each other, right? So on the other side of the pandemic, so we'll have been in some sense of a lockdown or social distancing or some version of that. Most people are going to have been in that for something like 18 months plus, right? And so at a simple level is, how do we rebuild our trust with people, right? So just because we don't know who might be infected or anything like that, right? So there's this kind of makes you wary of who's around you and what's doing, right? Who's sneezing and so on, right? But there's also then the issue of trust about information, so
Yeah.
and how societies or governments or leaders have communicated with their population. And you talked about the situation in the US, of course, and we saw that writ large in terms of different narratives, almost competing narratives, and so as sort of society, we have to kind of figure that out. But also what we saw at the level of cities is that what we're really entering into now, we think, is if you take the case that most people are going to live in big cities, right, and big being more than 100,000. So, but they could be metropolises, or they could be major satellite cities or second tier cities or so on, right? But there's basically going to be a competition between cities, is what we see, right? And cities are going to be competing at kind of city to city level and neighborhood level. And that's going to be a lot about the leadership of those cities. And they're going to be competing about who's creating the best urban environment to live, right? And attracting people based on that, right? The unfortunate part of that, of course, is that you do have sort of winners and losers in a
Right.
kind of a hard competition, right? Because at the moment, you can see, even in the US, there are many cities now that are actually bigger than states in terms of population and more influential, right? So the power sort of relationship and who people look to for leadership is starting to change. So this whole notion of the sort of leadership at the level of cities and how cities are able to kind of rebuild trust and so on is a really important sort of social dynamic that is going to take a while to play out, I think, right?
Yeah, I kind of, as you're sort of, mentioning all this, just, it's all lathered with issues of trust, right? Do you trust the leadership in your city? Do you not? In the US, we don't seem to have a very high opinion of our politicians on who, whichever side of the spectrum at this stage. And then there's, I mean, I don't know how it manifests in different cities. There's been so much of let each locality figure out how to deal with it. And there's been challenges. I'll give you one example stood out just 2 days ago. They in Philadelphia, they decided to give a nonprofit and they're the 6% of the vaccines to distribute. And this nonprofit set up like a real, apparently efficient, mechanized manner of just moving thousands and thousands of people through getting their shots. But they broke down in trust with the city, and as quickly as this clinic site went up, it got shut down because the nonprofit set up a for-profit company on the side, and they were worried and they weren't assured that they were going to not sell the personally identifiable health record information. And it turns out in the article, is just sort of reading through it, and it goes, the CEO, I forgot his name, 22, his age is 22, blah, 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 blah. He said there was no intention of ever selling this information. And I'm just sitting there, wait a minute. The city decided to give a 22-year-old, not to say there aren't really responsible, smart, forward-thinking 22-year-olds, but that to me is like, you gave such an important piece to a kid, who's just out of school. And then somehow you expect that not to have some issue bubble up out of it. And I think there was like a quote from one of their city councils, like, this whole thing was botched. And it's like, okay, but don't blame the 22-year-old, because he's just a kid. Like, what went on with that? And the sad part of all that type of scenario is just goes back to trust. What happened was, as soon as they shut it down, everybody that had been scheduled for their second shot got notifications. You need to come now to the location for the second shot. And so people went and showed up. There was no clinic. And now you just destroyed trust of a few thousand people in that this thing can be actually done right, and just like examples of that left and right. So how do you rebuild from that? There will be an incredible long-term effort to figure it out, I would assume.
And that's it's a very interesting point, because what we talked about in the previous consultation a lot actually was about sort of data and who owns it, right? And because if you're living in a dense urban environment, there's a lot of information being collected about you, even today, right, on your phone, like what you're doing, where you're going, all those type of things. And then there becomes this issue about who owns that data. And so one of the things that we looked at in terms of the pandemic is that, for example, there's an acceleration of knowing who's contacting who, right? I mean, that's the whole contact tracing, all of those type of issues. So so what we're becoming used to is this notion of instant health data. So we want to be able to go and do a test and get the results straight away, right? That works well in a pandemic. But then there's also recognition, recognizing who you are and where you're going, and who your connections are. So these are all really complicated issues that kind of blur this line between privacy and public good. And because if we manage our way through this pandemic, it's going to set up protocols or systems that will allow us to be able to track diseases and in other situations. So but it comes back to that whole issue of trust and how do we rebuild that, right? Because one of the things we are essentially played out in the original scenarios was this notion that one way that people could evolve in cities would be into a world of what we called the bubble paradox, was the sort of name of the scenario we came up with. And it was this idea that people in large sort of urban gatherings sort of get driven. Technology helps us create a lot of connectivity in a sort of seamless physical environment. But because cities are large and there's lots of different people, we sort of end up being in these our own little insular bubbles, right? So you can be essentially on your own in a city, but have a lot of connectivity with people, right? Because you can connect to people through your devices or smartphones and so on, right? So you can actually live in this little insular bubble. And the macro thing we called the bubble paradox, right? And it's a paradox because at first it feels good, right? If you can be, somewhat insulate yourself and have all the connectivity you want, plus all the amenities. But the downfall of it over time is that you start to lose that empathy with other people, and you start to lose the understanding and awareness of different perspectives, right? Because you can live in your own bubble. Well, how far is it from an insular bubble to an echo chamber, right? And if you're in an echo chamber, then it becomes a self-reinforcing point of view. And you know, we've seen that, of course, play out in different ways in different countries. But so it's a really interesting sort of kind of notion of what we're exploring, is this idea of, you know, this sort of living in insular bubbles, but you really want people to have connection, right? Because otherwise the breakdown is of trust with other groups, right? So if I'm in one group and you're in a different group, can I trust you, or are you different, right? And so there's all those social evolution issues.
Yeah, I see that in apartment living. I mean, you know, every piece of, I mean, every device has algorithms trying to give you the content that you know, excites you the most. And you could, you know, you don't know your neighbors, but you know some online group that you belong to because it's part of one of your hobbies or your work. It's like everyone is already in that sort of bubbled experience where you kind of have a hard time. I remember back in the day, we're going to date ourselves for sure, but back before there was cable and on demand and DVRs, it was like the show came on at 3 o'clock that everyone wanted to watch. And if you watched it, great. Next day at school or at wherever, you could all discuss what happened at that hilarious, you know, show. Now, just you kind of always have to probe. Have you seen this thing? No, you haven't. Okay. How about that movie? No, you haven't. Okay. Because everybody can kind of watch what they want when they want, but it's hard to then find the kind of common aspects. I mean, you end up just I don't know. I just end up kind of giving up asking people what shows they watched in a sense. Doesn't really matter, but I just it's like a little thing that chips away from our ability to bond, you know, or connect over it now, right?
Just a brilliant analogy, actually, Ernesto. I mean, just the way, like, you know, the notion that we would all watch the same TV show or the same program and then talk about it, right? It created connectivity, right? And so if we have this capacity to have almost infinite content, right? And so people are off in all sorts of different directions, then the challenge is, how do you build that sense of community or that sense of sort of belonging and connectivity as humanity in a city environment, an urban environment,
real life, right? In IRL,
in real life, right? and because the consequences, if you don't, right, is that you could inadvertently end up with because it's very comfortable in the insular bubble, right? But if you have too many of those for too long, what starts to happen is you get those sort of tears in the social fabric where there's this group and they become anti that group through lack of understanding, or there's the danger of that, right? And if you just say, look at the US, right, because you mentioned that, you know, there's quite different narratives on different sort of, you know, media echo chambers, right, for example, right? And that can create all sorts of kind of tension and conflict inadvertently in a society. So then the issue comes back to, at the level of cities, how do you build that trust? Who's the leadership? How does that leadership start to create that sense of identity or connectivity in a city, given that we all have to live in that city, right? And I think it's just a remarkably interesting challenge and opportunity for cities to be inventive, right? To kind of turn the coin a little bit or turn the tables and start to think about, okay, how do we think about technology being able to enable our experiences and help us sort of push into shared experiences as opposed to drive us into insular experiences.
Right. Don't just invest in like just the forms for you to fill out to, I don't know, get your permitting or whatever, but figure out ways to actually develop community around that, right? Draw in.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, and
that's got to
be at the same time. I mean, I don't think we give enough credence for how important this moment in time is in terms of the transition of humanity from an agrarian species to an urban dwelling species, right? So what comes with that is, if we almost all live in cities, this is an entirely different world, right? Which we're not geared for, right? And so how do we start to evolve as society and, you know, have the decision-making systems and the distribution of power and, you know, how do we manage resources and all those sort of things when we have, these large gatherings of people in, permanently in urban environments, and maybe occasionally do a weekend flit out to out to
Right.
some nature experience.
Right. And I wonder if some of that's even spreading into I wonder if the burbs are spreading, right? I mean, people, I don't know, in the Washington, D.C. area at this point in time, it's really hard to get a house because if you're, it used to be very difficult just to get an apartment downtown, right? Somewhere you conveniently be able to walk to so many different places and restaurants. And there's a lot of for young people, it's a great place to be, and the
Yep.
birds just seem to be sleepy. But this like lockdown and then getting stuck in your apartment and not being able to see nature and not being able to go and enjoy kind of like put a damper on city living. It's not really that great in a sense, and we can just tell that there's been a big pressure since we moved out further out to the burbs. There's been a lot, but we just see the housing stock has like just dwindled in terms of what's available. People are not, they want to come into a house that has a backyard so that you can grow your victory garden or whatever, or you can see some green nearby, right? So I wonder, did your group explore like having to reconfigure the city designs in a sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. We talked a lot about how we think this could sort of accelerate shifts of demographics within the city environment. So if you think of cities, we're really sort of dealing often with sort of concentric circles of, the traditional sort of downtown sort of urban core, and then, the sort of the fringe to that, and then first ring suburbs, which were typically the more prestigious sort of suburbs, and then, moving out to the suburbs, and then out finally to peri-urban space, and then rural land beyond that. And it could go a number of different ways, right? So for example, and it's going to have a lot to do with wealth and and influence, but
right.
but for example, there's a lot of urbanization of the suburbs occurring, right? So people are, you can look at long established suburbs, and even in the DC area, you'll see it. And there's kind of infill occurring, and you get in that sort of neighborhood component. Certainly working from home, if not full time, at least part time, will certainly accelerate that type of a trend, because people are going to want to have those sort of neighborhood amenities close by. It's no longer a commute sort of, bedroom community where you just drive in and out or commute in and out. So that's one thing that'll happen. I think some of the areas that there's still a big question mark is going to be what happens in the more dense downtown environments, because they've certainly been spaces that have not been so conducive in a pandemic. It might be great to be in a big, dense, vibrant city, but when you're on lockdown and you have to self-isolate or, then, people
Rough.
have obviously felt quite constrained, right? So,
Right.
but that's where public spaces become really important, right? And so then I think we will see a really sort of maybe gentle but evolutionary shift in terms of the relationship to public spaces. And in fact, a lot of cities have interestingly used it as a way, or use the pandemic as a way to accelerate experiments, right? So for example, reducing the number of car lanes and making more public space available. So outdoor dining, for example, those type of things, to be able to create different experiences. And I think those things could be incredible pluses for society, right? And if you think about, like a city, if it says, okay, well, let's find a way to, I don't know, if people could work from home 2 days a week, right? We could take 40% of the traffic off the road, right? So, what do we do? What can we do with that? Less congestion, and what can we do with those spaces? We don't have to put all this money into roads and bridges and tunnels. We can do other interesting things. So there is the chance, I think, that this could actually be a catalyst for cities to be more thoughtfully designed, where people may live in a closer proximity, like more of a neighborhood type experience. That's this notion of urbanization of suburbs, where you basically have all of your amenities within that relatively easy reach, and you might go off to work several days a week elsewhere, right? But more of your life is spent in that core space, which is your space in the city, whatever that is.
What other kind of you said there were several factors. I mean, the social fabric, and we talked about obviously the trust, and then perhaps on some of the opportunity to sort of redesign more communal spaces. What were other things that stood out, perhaps that surprised you, that these folks were thinking about could be the short-term and long-term impacts?
Yeah, so a couple of things that sort of jump to mind, right, is because I know when we've talked before, there's been this sort of debate about, does the pandemic, is it the end of cities, right? So, or does it drive people out of cityscapes, right? And we all heard the anecdotal information early on about, housing prices would blip, in different places. Well, it does seem that, sure, there's been a relocation, so some people are moving out of some of the bigger cities, but they're moving to other cities, right? And they're not moving to non-cities, right? People who have had the wherewithal may have bought a second home somewhere, but this notion of the revenge of the countryside, at this discussion we had, we pretty much decided that was dead, right? that human beings want to live in cities, they want to be close to amenities, and
just
cities
want a
are
little more
big.
space, but not to be too far away from everybody.
That's right. Because there's reasons why we gather in these sort of concentrations of humanity, right? But there's other issues which have become really important, which is, for example, if you look at one of the dynamics in the pandemic is what happens in the peri-urban space, right? So this, people escape to do that day trip out, and it's placed a lot of pressure on those sort of fringe components to cities, which are typically more sort of either sort of recreation-based or resource-based economies. There might be coastlines or rivers or lakes or ski field, whatever it is, right? But people have been going out there and really hitting those areas hard, and it's put a lot of pressure on those sort of societies,
smaller communities, right,
who just aren't geared up for it, right? To have this sudden surge of people, and actually a lot of people who don't have the natural skills to go bushwalking or hiking, right? They're predominantly more urban sort of skill based, and then suddenly, let's get out of the city for a day, right? And then suddenly, people have found themselves, putting pressure on emergency services and so on, right? So that was one thing, is that there's an important sort of relationship between the peri-urban space and the urban space. And peri-urban being very much that sort of thin fringe that goes around a city. So that was one topic we talked a lot about. Of course, the other things we talked about was it really put a spotlight on the issues of equity and inclusivity, right? So, the pandemic has really highlighted, who bears the pain, right? And if anything, I think it's brought a greater awareness. And of course, it coincided with Black Lives Matter and some of those issues too, which, it just has brought into stark relief where there is sort of lack of equity and sort of where there's injustices in society, or the perception of that. So we did talk a lot about that. And of course, that ties into the whole trust issue, right? So, because what happens is cities sort of find their feet and start to kind of, rebuild their social fabric, and how the leadership of a city communicates and how resources are distributed, that's going to have a big impact on either that sort of notion that cities are good places for all people, or if you've got good money, you end up being in an insular bubble that's good for you, right? So I think we try to tease out some of those issues as well.
When you bring these folks in together, like how do you sort of set the conversation? Because you're getting all these people I just imagine getting them out of their roles. They all probably have their own agendas, or wanting to, or have strong opinions about what direction things might go in. How do you sort of collate that into something then that is actually a good representative report from that? Like, you have some fundamental steps that you take these folks through?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because obviously, human beings are a fascinating full stop, right? And but we all come with our quirks and our sort of issues, right? And so being able to bring together a group of individually very expert people, and many of them being very influential people at the level of society or topic areas, and being able to sort of open a conversation where new thinking can arise, is obviously a challenge, right?
Right.
I think a key part in it is setting the context, right? So that and setting the challenge, so that people are, are sort of prone Well, people can sometimes be prone to defend their position, right? Or get on their soapbox, right? Or, convince you about how expert they are. But actually, fortunately, in this case, the pandemic and trying to think about what does this mean is sort of a leveler, right? Because none of us know. So it's very much an inquiry, and the orientation of the work that we do at Future IQ is very much that forward-looking, right? So it's not an argument about who's right or wrong. It's really a discussion or a speculation about how might this trend plus this trend plus this trend combine, and how does that reshape what becomes possible somewhere down the track?
Okay.
So the orientation of the conversation is very much somewhere into the future, and trying to figure out how things might evolve and what the impacts might be, right? And then sort of work backwards from that. But we find that orientation in all of our planning work, we bring that in, what we call a future orientation perspective, absolutely is essential, right? Otherwise, we will just evolve into shouting matches fairly fast.
Right. That's that's part of the reason I like talking to you, because that's kind of like, how do you go through with some of that? And a lot of the people that listen to this show, they're professionals at shepherding an association of a group of competitors or a group of people that want to create something. There's like an energy that they want suddenly to address something in their industry. And then they're the ones that are sort of charged to like coordinate. I mean, it's not just about getting them together in the room. It's like how do you prepare them so that they come ready with the right materials? Like, so the question to you then, David, is like, how do you, if you're going to talk about specific trends, how do you get them to agree that these are the actual trends that they all kind of think are legitimate, right? I mean, you and I could probably come up with all kinds of trends that we see, but we don't really have data to necessarily back up. But just, I see like a lot of people watching different shows, back to that analogy, but I don't really know. Like, I don't study, consumption of consumer television, right? How do you make sure that these guys bring to the table are well prepared? Like, what do you go through there?
So our processes actually are a mixture of data-driven and human-driven, and so we do a lot of research on emergent trends, and we try to sort of synthesize that as a starting point. I think the key, one of the things I've found, like, this is just sort of personally how I've, like, as an effective way, I think the future orientation is really important, right? But really also helping people try to understand what we call future splitting questions. So what are the big future splitting questions, right? So it's sort of another way of saying what is the topic if it goes this way or it goes this way? These are the things that are the really profound topics that we don't know. So an example of a future splitting question might be something like, in a very simplistic way, will AI end up being beneficial to human beings, or will it displace us? So it's and you could create mounted argument for either side, right?
Right. Okay.
But we know that however that turns out, it's going to have a profound impact, right? So we try to stack up a whole series of future splitting questions around really sort of major key themes, right? And try and think of things in terms of like elasticity and inelasticity. So a change is going to be elastic, as in, do they stretch out in response to the situation at hand? Like say the pandemic, right? Work from home, is that elastic or inelastic? So if it's elastic, we'll work from home until we're allowed to work back in the office again, and then we'll rush back to our normal behavior, right? Inelastic is where our behavior gets changed, but then when the pressure comes off, it doesn't snap straight back to the way it was, right? And that's a more inelastic type of an event. And I think the longer things last, the more inelastic they become. So if we had a pandemic that was 3 months, we probably wouldn't be talking about work from home permanently.
Right.
We would have probably all gone back to the way it was, right? Because it was just like an extended holiday.
If we didn't hear about variants of coronavirus coming from other parts.
Yes, and exactly, right.
Right.
So then how does that start to change travel and all those type of things, right?
Does the work from home become inelastic or elastic? I'll tell you one thing, it's inelastic for me. I'd rather have meetings over Zoom and get quickly to a decision point than me getting in the car, driving 30 minutes into DC. I mean, it's nice to get a cup of coffee with the client every once in a while, but it's not essential to moving things. I've saved so much time not having to get into town. And I just can't imagine people aren't feeling that same vibe.
Well, that's right. And so those things become, game changers, really, right? So then what happens, right, is, okay, let's play this one a little bit further. So when does work from home then become work from anywhere? And what are the implications of that, right? So you see people have, sort of relocated. But if you listen to a lot of the leaders who are talking of companies who are talking about, instituting, or have instituted, obviously, large-scale permanent work from home type scenarios, they're also talking about how that expands their talent pool quite dramatically, right? Because if you can work from home, well, why can't I get somebody who's working on the other side of the world to do the job and so on? So it's going to have all sorts of implications to the labour market in ways that we perhaps haven't all thought through fully just yet, right? But I think you're right. I think for those of us in the settings of Western worlds and so on, I think the workplace changes become quite profound, right? I mean, we're talking about transformation of the workplace, which people have been on about for years and years and years and never really seem to have cracked it, right? Well, we've been doing it for the last 12 months quite successfully in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, well, those of us that don't have to deal with small children, perhaps, right? The same. But you're totally right. I mean, I think that is a, if anything, that's the big implication that is to be determined. But if it is elastic, it's kind of like a rubber band that's been stretched. It's never going to really come back to its former self. We can probably rest assured of that. Right.
And there's other pluses too. I mean, I don't know what your personal experience is. I found this very humanizing in a way, right? So, people are no longer in roles, right? Or dressed differently, so everybody's, there's a kind of, there's an acceptance of, the dogs and cats running around in the background or the kids coming in or so there's this kind of remarkable connection, I think, has been able to be created where not only do people get to make decisions faster, as you say, or to have more time with their families, but I think our individual sort of posturing is changed, right? Because
I've noticed that as well. Like, you don't have to put on the suit. You don't have to put on airs about how important you are or they are or what. It's just kind of, you're human. So it's fine.
You're not sitting at the head of the table chairing the board meeting kind of deal, right?
Right. So. And now I'm sure that's been a jolt for those guys, those folks that are in leadership roles that was the atmosphere, that was the working atmosphere, very serious, very button up and, command control. And we're making, big, important decisions, but it must be refreshing to a lot of people that have to navigate that, to just kind of like, all right, well, that's not the important part, right? What's important is the substantive aspect of our meeting. What's the outcome of what we're talking about, right?
That's right.
Yeah. That's nice. That's a nice change.
Yeah.
I presume you got to kind of really dig in hard to find what are the nice changes or the potential nice changes to the outcome of this pandemic. But like my mother had always told me that in every storm, there's going to be the break. And, usually the outcome from something like this becomes something incredible. People, you learn to appreciate the more important things in life, right? Not your.
And I think one of the things I've seen, one of the really key things is people are thinking about the future in a different way, right? So like I said earlier, almost every significant dimension, there's at least some really important conversation occurring about the future of that aspect going forward, right? And whether it's about, and we'll soon see it soon enough, things like important issues like climate change and how we tackle that, they'll be back on the agenda. And I think we have a different space to have those sort of conversations now because, we've had this alarming jolt, right? And I think I think it will be a moment where people can give serious consideration to the longer term future. So, we're talking about the future of, work, or the future of travel, or the future whatever. Well, it's not a big step then to talk about the future of the planet, and how do we, think and collaborate together differently as humanity to address some of the issues that we can only do all together, like address a global pandemic. We have to be all in it together, right? And we're still figuring that one out, and we will for sure, right? But once we've figured that out, then what are the other big grand challenges that we can, have come together collectively and, in leadership groups, and start to try and figure out those solutions?
Yeah, I think that do you feel like you're in your work kind of future telling, does that lend to more optimism for you personally, or does it lend to more like, ooh, this could be scary? we have just more challenges than we even anticipated to think about?
I lean to the optimist side. So that's my sort of, my admission. But when I look at the data, right, which is what we do a lot of community engagement with all different age groups in society. And I'm really heartened by the awareness and the attentiveness of the younger generations. That's why I think that the 2020s will be like the 1960s, because we have a whole cohort of young people globally who are coming into the scene, who have a heightened awareness of issues, and I think have little time for nonsense. They're really wanting to see grand challenges solved. So I get quite excited about the ability to harness that sort of tech savvy young minds and apply them to solutions. And you see that happening already, all these ideas about, how certain things can get solved. And, your example of the 22-year-old CEO might be, but there's somebody who was a 22-year-old CEO, or is, right, who had a company that was able to provide that kind of solution, right? So, and so there's going to be a whole raft of that. Plus, I think what we're on the edge of is a real societal revolution. I think there's a lot of creativity and new ideas and new thinking wanting to come through, trying to push through and burst through. And you got to remember, we're only really a few years away from most of the baby boomers cycling out of roles of leadership, and then starting to see, the millennial generations and others become the dominant force in some of those sort of leadership and guidance discussions.
Yeah. Do you feel like, we're kind of getting a little off topic, but do you feel like sometimes it's sort of humanity's, it's the way we structure work, the way we deal with things is, at the end of the day, it's managing ambition from everybody's ambition to wanting to make a change, a significant, meaningful change to their environment. Right. And then that effort of just trying, it takes so much just to coordinate a group, a small group. Imagine just thousands of people, or 100,000 in a city, or 1 million or more, just to try to get them focused in the right outcome path, when all these individuals just want to do what they want to do. They don't necessarily want to be told what to do. Right. That's perhaps just the way humans just the way we are, that we have to figure out a way to find that balance, channel the ambition, but channel in a productive way, right, for all, right?
Well, it's that fundamental issue that we're all dependent on each other, right? And we all want to be independent, but we're all actually fundamentally dependent on each other, right? And as the pandemic has shown, we're dependent on each other doing the right thing to protect the health of a population. And so, at that level, we're a species, right? And so how a species interacts and conducts, I think, becomes really important. But back to my kind of earlier comments, I am pretty excited about what might come out of some of the thoughtful conversations that are occurring about how humanity can evolve, right? And how it evolves in the urban setting, and how it evolves in the kind of larger setting of the landscape and the world we live in.
What is sort of the next type of project is this group going to meet again in a year, to reassess do you go back in your prognostications, and
yes,
you okay, did we guess right? And what do the trends show now, and are we guessing in the right direction? Because it's still a guess, right? You still think about the future.
Well, the fundamental outcome of this most recent meeting was we were really pleased with how robust the thinking was 2 years ago. That in fact we had anticipated an environment that a pandemic, it could make sense in those scenarios, and it's really just pushed us towards one of those potential futures. But we were so pleased with the outcome and the depth of the discussion is that we're actually reconvening again in March to talk about solutions, right? And so what we really did a couple of weeks ago was identify what we thought are the key challenges or issues. And we've got some discussion boards where people are, interacting. So we had discussions, but now we've got sort of virtual discussion boards where people are continuing to probe a bit deeper. But then we want to reconvene in March to talk about solutions to those, so that if you wanted to be, for example, you were a leader in a city and you wanted to say, okay, well, here's this range of issues. What do a group of people who have some significant subject expertise from around the world, what are their first level views about what solutions or what should leadership be doing in the city? We want to try and put something like that together.
The just on the business side of your sort of the career side for you, like, do you, when you get somebody reaching out to you about their group, do you get, does it excite you to think like, oh wait, if a group of librarians contacted you, we need to understand the future of libraries and what we really need to invest in. Was it more books or more digital products? I mean, does that intrigue you? I mean, does that get you out of bed? You're like, oh wow, let's see what they're going to talk about. I mean, you can't be an expert in everything these people do. You're sort of just the guy that helps channel their discussions into something, more fruitful, I would imagine, right?
Well, yes. And so, yes, I find those topics, I mean, it sounds a little bit nerdy, but I find those incredibly fascinating. And I really enjoy the kind of mix of the human dynamic, right? So people trying to figure it out, right? But also what does the trend information tell us about certain topic areas? And as you know, we've done foresight research looking at, future manufacturing, next industrial revolution.
Several reports on your website. We should plug.
Yeah, and so we try and sort of synthesize trend line information and sort of put our own interpretation on that. I find that really fascinating. So, but even in any of our engagements, we're not content adverse. Like, we don't come in with no knowledge, right? I think one of the things we've been able to build as a company is a really unique kind of macro perspective about what are trends across a whole range of different topic areas. So, for example, we're currently doing a project working with the chiropractic industry in North America to look at the future of the chiropractic industry, right?
Okay.
And I didn't go into that with a lot of content knowledge, but it's a really fascinating topic as you start to get into it, and the particular issues that profession, of 80,000 people, in terms of what they have, and then how they see their various sort of future trajectories. I just find all of those things just personally quite intellectually challenging and curious and fascinating, and then watching people kind of work through it and trying to wrestle with how do they set the trajectory that's best for their sector or their industry. I just find those type of processes to be remarkable.
Like, I would understand just thinking in the future, you're gonna be considered an expert on just the topics of AI, certain types of technology. Man, if you just look at those reports, if anybody on the show listens to, check out those reports. I mean, they're very thorough, and just given your past case studies, and you have a ton of them, some of those technologies are going to have an impact on, let's say, these chiropractor guys, or ladies and gentlemen. But how do you bone up then? How do you grab onto the knowledge of what they specifically exist? Like, how do you go about researching them so that you understand what's pressuring them? What's the consternation? Of course, the client or whoever hires you is going to fill you in some of that information, but do you have any go-to sources of information that you instantly start reading, grabbing a book on, or whatever?
Yeah, so like most industries, there will be something that's already been done. But in this case, actually, we conducted a future perception survey. Okay. And we had, and it was quite a long survey actually, and it was around a whole range of trends and how people perceived they would impact their industry. We had over 3,500 people take that survey. So that gives us an incredible data set of people from right across, all the states of America, but all sorts of different sort of settings in terms of types of practices and so on. And then we work with them on that data to then start to shape these various scenarios for the future. So that's why I say we try and do data-driven and human-driven, right? So, there's sort of the foresight, like the future orientation. What does that trend research say? There's also the perception type survey, data survey inside of an industry. But then there's also the magic of the human mind, which is, how do we make a process where people can come together to figure this out, right? And so we both try to help provoke the right kind of conversation, pose the sort of questions, but help people find the solutions themselves. I mean, I think that's really important. And perhaps I don't think it's valued enough is that, most research really, when you get down to it, is driven by collective perception of a group of experts, right? So, even most of the forecasts about artificial intelligence and so on, they're based on interviewing a whole range of experts or people who have expert knowledge, and then basically finding where their thoughts coalesce together, right? And that becomes the data point for
the threshold of their industry as they see it themselves, and you kind of map those points out. What are the threshold changes? What are they expecting when AI will break out of narrow AI to the next level, general AI, whatever? And you can kind of then get a sense. So it's through this research that includes surveying the group and getting them to give you those answers is part of that process, is what you're...
That's part of it for sure, right? And I think the sort of notion of thinking through scenarios of the future, that's a really key part of our methodology. This idea of different plausible futures and play those out. So sort of like different tracks into the future. Sort of what if this and this happens, and then looking at it over time. And that's exactly what we do with the future of urban living. What happens if society evolves this way or evolves that way, right? What are the consequences and implications? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the track, and sort of speculating about those different pathways. And that becomes, I think, really powerful, because then you get this kind of future canvas where you can sort of see a more total view of the range of choices that are in front of an organization or a city or whatever the client is. And then you can start to really drill into it and say, well, there's a whole range of different futures here, but that one there, that really excites me, right? And that one there, that terrifies me.
Okay. And you find so the priority scenarios, right? The most likely scary thing, the most likely great thing. Now, what are we doing to track towards the great thing versus the scary thing, I presume?
Exactly. And we ask people sort of this notion of what's the expected future. So where do you think you're going to end up if you just keep going the way you're going? And because the sort of that future planning is so broad, it allows people to see perhaps what they might have been blind to in terms of the trajectory that they were on, right? Or because most people are sort of in a fairly short-term time frame. And things might look good in the short term, but if you play it out over 10 years, it might change a little bit. So we try and give that sort of
gas industry perhaps might need to think through, like, have you worked with any gas companies, any of the, fossil fuels?
Exactly. That's at a kind of a simple level, that's exactly one of those future splitting type of questions, right? So what happens when, well, we're very close actually to the potential for renewable energies to supply all the demands we have, right? So what happens to all those other resources? What happens to those industries, right? I mean, you look at the amount of money and sort of skill tied up in those, but then again, humanity's gone through that over and over and over. Professions or skills or industries that were once there that no longer are there because things moved on or technologies surpassed them.
Right. And I think that's kind of I would presume that would be fruitful conversations for those guys to think about, well, what are their, short-term strategies of just doing what they're doing, but what long-term strategies do they need to shift the assets and skill sets of massive organizations? I mean, these are giant companies that can't just turn on a dime. It takes time, right? So that would probably be an intriguing group to try to figure out, what do they see the future, right?
Yeah, and remember at the same time, so for leaders of organizations or companies, the challenge is that the speed of change is accelerating, right?
Yeah.
So we're going into a period, or we're in a period where um, all these converging technologies are going to start to connect together, right? And then that just basically supercharges the speed of change. So if you look, for example, the vaccine for the pandemic, right? So who would think, there's been diseases around for decades and decades and decades and no solution, right? And what do we have already? 5 or 7 vaccines that are permitted for use around the world in an incredibly short space of time. And what powers a lot of that, if you start to dig into things, if you think about the impact of artificial intelligence, so that if you take the presumption that anything that can be automated will be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and will be done so quickly. So if you look at, for example, the explosion of, the courier delivery, Amazon type sort of scenario, right? What's driving all that in the background is automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, all those type of things, right? And so any profession is going to face some substantial shakeup in the next 10 years, right? And so while we used to have time to perhaps consider things more carefully, the challenge now is the speed of change is accelerating, right? And there's no real sign that that's going to slow down, right? So if anything, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of trends, right? And so that makes, I think, that sort of thinking about the future to try and anticipate where things might go, or making sure your strategy is right, is critically important, because you can get left behind really fast now.
Right, and I would presume we're well, in terms of AI, we're well past, like, does this stuff really even work, or does it help more than just simply coming up with predictive text, so you don't have to type the whole word out when you're replying to a text message? It's like it's well beyond that. It's like
Yeah.
it's predicting optimal routes, optimal thresholds on any manufacturing process, anything related to writing. General GPT-3 is, even if anybody's ever played around with that thing, that's a spooky tool that can generate just readable, coherent, understandable text by just putting in a few, like, tell me something about XYZ, and it will predict what's the most likely set of sentences that make the most sense. It doesn't, there's no, somebody doing the analysis of it. It's just simply an algorithm that's just probabilistic in its nature. And so it's just incredible. And you can apply that to anything that's repetitive.
That's right.
If you're in a role that you're doing a lot of repetitive work, it just means it hasn't touched you yet, but that's, you need to think about what that's going to mean to you individually, or to you or your company or organization, right? So it must be easier now to have these conversations. Like, I think that would be like an anchoring topic, overriding topic for the chiropractors. Like, what does AI going to mean for their work?
Yeah,
right?
so, and it's actually one of the drivers we probed, of course, right? And because there's a good body of thought that artificial intelligence is the underpinning technological driver for the next decades, like the internal combustion engine was for the last century, right? So that technology really shaped so much of what we see today. Well, if you take the case that artificial intelligence, which is at the very early stages, that's the defining technology, because it harnesses everything together. And so if you're not thinking about that, you're probably already missing the boat a little bit, right? But and I think that's going to be the challenge for any industry. So even like you say, in a case like chiropractic, there's not just that piece, but there's all the other components of, like, virtual medicine and all those sort of technological driven issues that come into play, that could impact an industry that is very much based on hands-on manipulation, right? So as a potential disruptor, yeah, absolutely, it could be a disruptor in the right configuration.
Right. And then that is what these guys have to think about and make sure that they adjust and adapt, right, to the future, the most likely outcome future for them, right?
So for them, the question is, where do they fit into a human being's health treatment? You know, where does that approach fit into people's suite of services that we select from? So, yeah.
Right. That we can just get online and just pick one and be like, let's just
Yeah.
talk to somebody to help me with my pain or whatever. Yeah. David, awesome. We're well past the hour. Thank you so much. Once again, this has been great. I'd like to keep doing this periodically as you go through some more of, the thinking. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be people like you, that can help us shepherd a richer understanding of what's happening around us. So let's keep in touch. I think you got,
Yeah, thank you very much. And, I really appreciate you sort of inviting me on to talk about this, because I do think it's through the dialogue as human beings that we can figure out a lot of these big challenges that we have, right? And of course, I think people are craving it. That's my observation. People are craving constructive conversations. We've been through a period of a lot of, I don't know, divisive conversation, shall we say. And I think people are now really looking forward. And I think through this decade, will really look forward to how do we as human beings discover something a bit better, as a better way to work together and think together.
Yeah, David, thank you. It sounds like it's a good place. It's a good business to be in the world you're in right now. Where if somebody needs to find you, if they have a group that they need some help organizing collectively their thoughts of what the future is going to hold for them and what they need to plan, how do they reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
So probably straight through our website, right? So it's Future IQ or future-iq.com, but you could just Google Future IQ and you'll come straight to us, right? So all our information, as you mentioned, actually all of our research reports are on the website, and a lot of our sort of background client work and so on is there as well.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Thank you very much. And you guys that are listening, or a few of you are watching on YouTube, since we just started that channel, I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys like the new direction that we're taking with the show. All right. Take care, everybody.
For more episodes of Through the Noise, go to throughthenoise.us.